Well, the Catholic Church continues to wash its dirty laundry in public, but they just can't seem to get those semen stains out, can they? Now, the Pope is in the spotlight for his own role as architect of the cover-up and therefore as facilitator of countless additional child rapes that could have been prevented if he and his church hadn't been solely concerned about their own reputation. A reputation that now couldn't be any lower if Satan himself were to step onto the balcony in St. Peter's Square to conduct Easter Mass with a choir boy on the end of his penis. I've often thought that if Satan were a Christian, he would be a Catholic, so it came as no surprise to be told last week that Satan is in fact ensconced in the Catholic Church, is working directly out of the Vatican, controlling operations from a big old captain's chair. Okay, I made that last bit up, but only because it's the image that always comes to mind whenever I think of the Catholic Church. And the Church's chief exorcist, yes, such a post really does exist. I don't know if it's higher or lower than, say, a wizard, but it's pretty high up in the mumbo-jumbo department. And he says that Satan is living in the Vatican. Well, I don't think much of his choice of company, but if Satan really is a Catholic, well, it might help to explain some of the events of the last 2,000 years. Before the Reformation, about 500 years ago, all Christians in Europe were Catholics, until the Church became just too corrupt and debauched, even for Christianity to stomach. But it is the original Church of Christ who said, "Upon this rock I will build my church," referring, of course, to St. Peter, the first pope, whose nickname, apparently, was Rock. Unfortunately, human nature being what it is, the moment the church was established, it became a political organisation, which meant that the consolidation of power and influence quickly became much more important than the message. Message? What message? Oh, that message, of course, yeah. And inevitably this led to bickering about status and who got to wear the big ring and the fancy hat, you know, the really important stuff, until before long rival popes were facing each other with massed armies on the battlefield, in the name of Christ, naturally. Now, even at this point, if Jesus had come back, he would have said, "What are you people doing? I haven't been gone 5 minutes and already you're hacking each other to pieces like a bunch of savages. You've missed the point so completely," he'd say, wouldn't he? "You're so far wide of the mark here. This is way beyond embarrassing," he'd say. "I feel as if I'm talking to chimpanzees," he'd say. No offence, by the way, to any chimps who may be watching. And this is early days, don't forget. Jesus wouldn't yet know anything about all the other horrors that were about to be enacted in his name in the coming years. The Crusades, the Inquisition. He wouldn't know about the systematic suppression of knowledge and free thought that would characterize his church for the next 2,000 years. He wouldn't know about the conquest of the New World, where the sacred cross of Jesus slashed and burned its way through entire populations in a way that modern jihadis can only dream about, imposing itself with unparalleled cruelty on civilizations half a world away that even today still don't quite know what hit them. This is a church that claims credit for keeping civilization alive during the Dark Ages, but the truth is that clergy were the only people who knew how to read and write, and they made damn sure it stayed that way for hundreds of years. When the printing press was finally invented in Europe, 700 years after the Chinese invented it, the church condemned it as a work of the devil. Takes one to know one, I guess. The first man to translate the Bible into English was burned at the stake for his trouble, along with any astronomers and free thinkers they could round up when they weren't too busy making money from selling places in heaven, or rolling boulders of dogma into the path of science at every opportunity, from Galileo on the way through the Enlightenment, which might just as well not have happened, up to the present day. This is a church that condemned the smallpox vaccine, for Christ's sake, as a violation of God's will. It opposed anesthesia in childbirth because a woman is supposed to suffer pain as punishment for Eve's sin. Not Adam's, Eve's sin. The sin of being a woman. It's one of the two main sins in the entire Christian faith. The other one being, anybody? Yes, of course, the Jews killing Jesus, which might explain why the minds of the righteous are so often filled with wicked women and evil Jews. You know, if the Jews really did kill Jesus, they didn't do a very good job, because apparently he's still alive. Where's Mossad when you need them? You know, if Jesus ever comes back, Mossad might as well bump him off, because the Jews have already taken the blame for killing him. They might as well get the value. About 70 years ago, they took the blame 6 million times as a direct result of the Catholic Church's rabid anti-Semitic teachings. Europe is often referred to as a Judeo-Christian culture, but historically it's always been more of a Jew-hating Christian culture, thanks entirely to the Catholic Church. For centuries, the Church in Europe preached open hatred against Jews, assiduously embedding Jew hatred into the very fabric of society, just as it is in many Muslim countries today. They made it virtuous to despise Jews, and it became, as it's becoming again in modern Europe, politically correct to be anti-Semitic. And this was no lapse of judgment or some flash of insanity by some crazy pope. This was centuries of institutionalized and deliberately focused hatred. When popes still had executive power, one after another, they passed laws to victimize and humiliate Jews and steal their property. Jews weren't allowed to hold public office or to mix on equal terms with Christians. They were obliged to wear yellow hats and scarves in some cases to identify themselves. Ring any bells? They were restricted to certain occupations and certain locations, and thanks to the blood libel recently resurrected so tastefully by the Swedish press, they were massacred on a regular basis by the faithful, pious and righteous Christians with the Church's approval. So when Hitler came along, it was easy for him to pick on Jews because the Catholic Church had already made them such an easy target by consistently fingering them as hated Christ killers. Hitler knew he'd have a lot of support because he knew that generations of Catholic children had been taught by their religion to hate Jews, just as many Muslim children are today. How could they not be influenced? How could society not be poisoned? And Hitler, by the way, was a Catholic, not an atheist as people often claim. He was baptized a Catholic and he was never excommunicated for his crimes. No Nazis were ever excommunicated by the Catholic Church, although every communist on the planet was. Indeed, the Catholic Church actually provided documentation to help many Nazis escape to South America or to certain Arab countries who wanted to exploit their expertise in exterminating Jews. If you believe in Satan, and if you believe that Satan is responsible for all the evil in this world, then the Catholic Church is surely his most fiendishly brilliant creation. Because when you look at its record, it's hard to imagine how the Catholic Church could have had a more negative influence on human history than it has. And even harder not to conclude that any other organisation with its track record would be legislated out of existence as an enemy of humanity. If the Catholic Church hadn't so consistently and virulently condemned the Jews for killing Jesus, there would have been no Holocaust. There would have been no reason for anyone to think about picking on Jews. And that means today there might be no Jewish state and no Middle East conflict. That's quite a lot to have on your conscience, isn't it? How fortunate for the Catholic Church that it doesn't possess a conscience. But at least it gives ordinary Catholics an opportunity to feel guilty about something real for a change, if they feel so inclined, and to reflect on the reality that the Jews didn't kill Jesus at all. The Catholic Church killed Jesus and has spent the last 2,000 years dragging his entrails through the dirt. And if he came back tomorrow, he'd be the first to say so. You know it's true. We all do. Pax vobiscum, and all that jazz.
Isaac in Fresno, how are you?
I'm doing well, and you?
Not too bad.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
Okay, did the screener already tell you my question?
It says here the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world?
Yes, I imagine you disagree with that position?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Perhaps this would work better first if you presented your reasoning.
I'm sorry, hang on a second. Let me back up for a second. My position is that the Catholic Church itself has done good. So if the only argument is that the Catholic Church has done good and therefore it's a force for good in the world, okay. My objection to the labeling of the Catholic Church as a force for good is the things that they do that aren't good.
Okay.
And my position would be that Catholics have done good in the world.
Yes.
But the Catholic Church is not a force for good.
Well, I mean, it's still people. It's hard to say, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to get down to the building hasn't done anything, but yeah.
Well.
Examples?
Yeah, so, yes, examples
Sure.
of why you think the world will be better without the Catholic Church.
Wow.
AIDS in Africa.
AIDS in Africa, Inquisition, the idea that there are special people who need to relate God's message to you, creating a kind of an incredibly unequal society, indulgences, opposing contraception pretty much everywhere.
Which is your AIDS in Africa, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The extreme, how did I not go to this first? The extremely illegal actions that make them a corrupt criminal organization of moving pedophiles around from church to church over a colossal amount of time in order to save their image and allow these predators to keep raping children. How's that for not a force for good in the world?
Well, my first response to that is I'll pose the same question you posed to the gentleman earlier who was talking about scientists. You mentioned, why aren't scientists contradicting his statements? Well, why aren't litigators contradicting your statements? If that were really the case, the Attorney General would have taken the Catholic Church to task on that a long time ago.
Well, no.
So,
part of the problem.
But, I mean, but no, that's beside the point.
No, it's
Wait,
beside
no,
the
it's
point.
not.
A post of complaints within the organization, and you've even labeled it as criminal. But the thing is, why in the world don't you bother to reform the organization rather than simply to destroy it?
Because I'm not a member of it.
The police.
I don't care to reform it. Why would I care to reform it? First of all, you're not going to just sit here and come up with fallacy after. Well, if what you said was true, then certainly the legislature should be going after them. Have you looked in Ireland lately where that's exactly what they're doing? When you're talking about an organization that is systematically set up to avoid and inhibit criminal investigations, it's really, really hard, especially when you talk about something that's rich and filthy rich and powerful. The fact that it hasn't happened yet, oh wait, no, that's not true. It's happening now. So your initial rebuttal here is absolute nonsense.
Sir, that's funny. You haven't even heard my entire argument because you haven't allowed me to finish.
Would you like me to allow you to finish, or would you like me to hang up on you?
Yes, please. Most certainly. Thank you. Now, the police force exists. It's a necessary force to keep criminals away. Yet there exists corruption in the police force, and they do things far worse than the Catholic Church. And mind you, these pedophiles would have done what they did.
Pause. I'm going to let you finish. Pause.
But we do not.
I put you on hold in case you didn't hear that. Nobody can hear you but you right now. So you're paused.
We do not get rid of a necessary system.
You're still yelling into the phone.
Yeah.
Sir, I do not want to have a shouting match.
You're not having a shouting match with anybody except yourself. Your ass is on hold.
That would be most appreciated.
You don't understand. If you would pause for a second, I'm trying to explain to you that you're on hold so that I can respond to your nonsensical position here.
No, sir, no.
Wow, you don't know what hold means. I'm going to give you exactly one more chance to actually have a conversation here, which is a back and forth, and you're gone. The police is a necessary organization, and it's worth reforming. The Catholic Church is not a necessary organization. It is a nonsensical organization. A bunch of fat, lazy do-nothings who have been living off the public dole for centuries. The fact that they can do good is a testament to the fact that there are good people who will do good. But the organization is corrupt. It is poisoned to its core, and it serves no essential good purpose, no true purpose. It's lie after lie, promoting harm to real people, and you can sit there and engage in histrionics and yelling at yourself on hold all you want, but the Catholic Church is not a force for good, and fuck you for saying so.
There have been many things in the news. There was the Pennsylvania clergy sex abuse bomb that went off this week. A grand jury report detailing the abuse of more than 1,000 children by more than 300 priests over the years. And there are probably vastly more. This sort of thing is underreported, as we all know, and also sedulously covered up by the Church. In fact, it's not much of an exaggeration to say that the Catholic Church is a machine, one of whose primary functions has been to ensure that children get raped and that the world doesn't find out about it. This really is not an exaggeration. That reminded me of an article I wrote about 10 years ago when a similar scandal happened in Ireland. I wrote an article titled Bringing the Vatican to Justice. Actually, I may have read this on a much earlier podcast, but I'll just read the first 2 paragraphs here because it's really all I have to say in the present case. And it makes a point that I think is all too rarely made. So here's what I wrote, I think in 2009 or so. I've paid too little attention to the sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. Frankly, it has always felt unsportsmanlike to shoot so large and languorous a fish in so tiny a barrel, and there seemed to be no need to deride faith at its most vulnerable and self-abased. Even in retrospect, it is easy to understand the impulse to avert one's eyes. Just imagine a pious mother and father sending their beloved child to the church of 1,000 hands for spiritual instruction, only to have him raped and terrified into silence by threats of hell. Then imagine this occurring to tens of thousands of children in our own time, and to children beyond reckoning for over 1,000 years. The spectacle of faith so utterly misplaced and so fully betrayed is simply too depressing to think about. But there was always more to this phenomenon that should have compelled my attention. Consider the ludicrous ideology that made it possible. The Catholic Church has spent 2 millennia demonizing human sexuality to a degree unmatched by any other institution, declaring the most basic, healthy, mature, and consensual behavior as taboo. Indeed, this organization still opposes the use of contraception, preferring instead that the poorest people on earth be blessed with the largest families and the shortest lives. As a consequence of this hallowed and incorrigible stupidity, the Church has condemned generations of decent people to shame and hypocrisy, or to Neolithic fecundity, poverty, and death by AIDS. Add to this inhumanity the artifice of cloistered celibacy, and you now have an institution, one of the wealthiest on earth, that preferentially attracts pederasts, pedophiles, and sexual sadists into its ranks, promotes them to positions of authority, and grants them privileged access to children. Finally, consider that vast numbers of children will be born out of wedlock, and their unwed mothers vilified, wherever church teaching holds sway, leading boys and girls by the thousands to be abandoned to church-run orphanages, only to be raped and terrorized by the clergy. Here in this ghoulish machinery set whirling through the ages by the opposing winds of shame and sadism, we mortals can finally glimpse how strangely perfect are the ways of the Lord. Okay, so that's how I opened that article. But let's be clear about what's happening here. This isn't just the law of large numbers, where you sample hundreds of thousands or millions of people and you find some thousands of them abusing children. There's something special about the Catholic Church. Okay, there's a specific machinery here, based on dogmatism and faith in ridiculous ideas. And every detail matters, like the belief in hell and sin and celibacy and the shame of out-of-wedlock birth. Of course, there are other religious communities that have abused their kids and conceal the crime so as not to bring embarrassment to the institutions. There have been scandals among the Orthodox Jews in New York in recent years. But no one has perfected this horror show like the Catholic Church. This is an institution that routinely spends millions of dollars to protect individual priests who they know have raped children for decades, moving them from one parish to the next where they can rape again, paying hush money to victims, and when these cases wind up in court, doing everything they can to shame and discredit the children or the adults who were once those children. This is pure evil, and the details are insane. I'm just going to read you a snippet from the Pennsylvania grand jury report. Okay, this is a quote. Despite a priest's admission to assaulting at least a dozen young boys, the bishop wrote to thank him for, quote, all the good you have done for God's people. The Lord, who sees in private, will reward, end quote. Another priest confessed to anal and oral rape of at least 15 boys, as young as 7. The bishop later met with the abuser to commend him as a, quote, person of candor and sincerity, and to compliment him for, quote, the progress he has made in controlling his, quote, addiction. When the abuser was finally removed from the priesthood years later, the bishop ordered the parish not to say why. Quote, nothing else need be noted, end quote. This is further down here in the report, we came across a file in which the diocese candidly conceded that this, quote, is one of our worst cases, end quote, but of course told no one about him. Actually, we came across the statement in the files of several other priests. Then there was the file with a simple celebratory notation, quote, bad abuse case. Victim sued us. We won. There was the priest, for example, who raped a 7-year-old girl after she'd had her tonsils out. This is me now. This girl was raped in her hospital room. Just picture the life of this person, okay, in the context of a faith so captivating that there was no recourse here. Picture the family around this girl. You get indoctrinated from birth into a cult, and this is a cult staffed with an inordinate number of pedophiles who gain access to your kids. Back to the report. Or the priest who made a 9-year-old give him oral sex and then rinsed out the boy's mouth with holy water to purify him. Or the boy who drank some juice at his priest's house and woke up the next morning bleeding from his rectum, unable to remember anything about the night before. Okay, so that's as much as I'll give you. Sorry to ambush you with that, but it's hard even for me to pay attention to this stuff and to remember how horrible these details are. None of this should be surprising. This is in the DNA of this organization. If you had to sign a user agreement for the Catholic Church, this should be part of it. Somewhere in the fine print, it should say, the ideology of our organization acts as a filter attracting sexually confused and conflicted and conscienceless men, and we employ these people and hide their crimes, and we've done this for over 1,000 years. Now give us your kids. Hearing that the Catholic Church is raping children should be as surprising as hearing that Google and Facebook are selling your data to third parties. Anyway, it's intense to read about all this. You're getting me just after I did that, hence the top spin. Imagine if there were a Fortune 500 company that was raping and abusing children for its entire existence and systematically concealing it. What would we have done to that company? And now, consider what hasn't happened to the Catholic Church.
All right, everyone, we got to step up pressure on the Catholic Church. This is the first time in many years that priest abuse has been like a prevailing story. Because I can remember back, I think wasn't it the early 2000s, the last time you had a bunch of cases and people came forward and they're like, hey, I was victimized by a priest years ago, or I'm being victimized by a priest yesterday. And it became a big thing. I remember they had that movie with Oliver O'Grady. Yeah, that was one of the big cases because he had been shuttled around by the Catholic Church, but the bishop that was over him shuttled him, I think, on 4 different occasions from parish to try to hide his sex crimes. He had abused hundreds of people. Children of all, apparently he doesn't have a particular age threshold, doesn't even really care about gender because he was basically molesting everybody. He's one of the worst people, and the church sent him to Ireland, and he's not in jail. As far as I know, he's still free. He's still, if he's still alive, he was an older gentleman, gentleman loosely speaking. But I mean, during the documentary, they're like showing him next to the fucking play school area, watching the kids and stuff, and he's sitting there like basically chuckling and joking about his pathology. And these sick people exist apparently at large levels within the Catholic Church. Now we have a new story from Germany. They've got some dozens of priests there that have been accused. And part of it is moral panic, but no, I can believe it because we've got a precedent for priests doing this. When you've got someone in a position of power where they're, alone with kids or alone with anybody else, that can be abused. This is why you constrain government, because power tends to corrupt them and make them abusive. Well, the Catholic Church doesn't have maybe as much doctrinal legal power anymore, but it certainly has a de facto power because of people's belief in that particular deity. The sort of tradcon belief, oh, the God will hate me if I tell people that this priest did bad things to me, I'll end up getting accused. They'll call me a whore or something. That happens within Catholicism. Another reason I hate organized religion. A bunch of BS for the most part. People in fancy clothes trying to dispense spirituality to you when you should be searching for it on your own and not being lazy about it. I really believe that. But beyond that sort of stuff, talking about organized religion, It seems like the Catholic Church is in a unique position of being just riddled with perversion. They had a hotline that they set up in New Jersey for victims of priest abuse. They're like, oh, if you've been victimized by a Catholic priest or bishop or whatever, you can call this number, we'll talk to you, blah, blah, blah. Get a legal case going, give you counseling. The phone was ringing off the hook so much that basically it was overrun. I can believe that, because when you look at like New Jersey, or the area, and you think about how many tens of millions of people reside within like the New York metro, or certainly area, considering the number of them that are Catholic, it would be odd if some tens or hundreds of thousands of them hadn't been abused. In all honesty, it seems to be a very, very high rate. And I'll tell you why. It's for the same reason that you get all these stories about teachers that are abusing people, both physically, sexually, whatever it happens to be. It's the same thing. People, I think, the more religious side is that people who are like perverted, they're like, oh my God, I feel guilty, so they go into the priesthood and they're like, well, they're going to teach me how to be celibate, they're going to teach me how to be holy and pray my way through it and not victimize anyone, so I'll be better because God will help me. They get in there, they realize that that doesn't actually help them, they still have that underlying problem, because they're not coming forward saying, hey, oh my bishop, I lust after people of an illegal age. Please get me into, therapy that'll actually work instead of telling me to just be celibate and pray it away. And it doesn't work. And so they victimize people. The other side is opportunistic. That is, someone who's perverted, they might say, well, I'll just become a priest. Look, the Catholic Church will shelter me. I'll be alone with people all the time and do whatever I want. And then I'll just tell them that they'll go to hell if they say anything. Works for me. Unfortunately, I guarantee you that there are people in the Catholic Church who've done it. It's not just Catholicism. Let's get over the concept that it's just the Catholic Church. But more visibly so, it seems Catholicism is uniquely guilty of this at a higher level. Could it be the doctrine? I mean, all these tradcons will talk about certain other groups and their doctrines and how they affect the beliefs and the ways and the sort of lifestyles of the believers. Well, why not for Catholicism too? Let's dig through the doctrine a little and see what could possibly be spawning this. Respect your elders, I guess. Spare the rod, spoil the child. It's just, old Grady used a different rod. The Catholic Church has a deep, deep problem with this. How can you possibly say that the Pope, by the way, if he knew this was going on and appointed some cardinal anyway, how the fuck could God possibly decide, oh yeah, he's the most holy person in the world? You should listen to this dude in the white robe. He's like all great and shit. Meanwhile, the prior pope had been the head of the council that was looking into the sex abuse claims under Pope John Paul. Ratzinger was appointed by John Paul himself while still a cardinal to that same thing. That was during the O'Grady period. So now you got two popes in a row that apparently knew about these problems going on and did but fuck nothing. And then, of course, John Paul was obviously complicit. I know that he's held up on a pedestal by the Polish and by Catholics. They're like, oh, he was such a great pope and stuff, for, I don't know why. Because he kissed somebody's foot once. It's like, yeah, but he never had to worry where his next meal was coming from. These people, they're so pious. Oh, look, it's like with Francis. Oh, Pope Francis, he doesn't carry the golden cross, and he doesn't wear the little crown, and he doesn't wear the ruby slippers and all the other, weird Babylonian fish cult sort of iconography that they wear. So he's so pious. Yeah, but he can drink wine anytime he wants. It's the good stuff. His table is not empty. He doesn't have to worry about a draft coming in when he's sleeping at night. No, he's not like taking a vow of poverty by not carrying a bunch of gold around. More likely, it's just he's like, hey, dude, I'm in my 70s. This stuff is heavy. Fuck it, you carry the gold. I'll carry this little wooden staff because, it only weighs a couple pounds. But they've got a huge problem with priest abuse. It seems to be like maybe 1 out of every 10 priests is buggering somebody. or they're gay. And again, it's like, who cares? But, that is against the rules of your church. It's kind of funny. It's sort of like when you look, and if you look at Catholicism especially, if you look back at like the medieval era, the Renaissance, have you ever heard this? The monks used to build onto their monasteries a special room that was connected, but they would declare it not part of the monastery. It was like, had its own door. And so it's like, oh, that's not the monastery. And they'd go in there to drink and solicit prostitutes because they were, semi-allowed to do so at times. And it was like originally priests, even though they were supposed to be celibate, it was understood that they had their lady friends or guy friends, and the Catholic Church didn't care. Then there was that one pope that was riddled with polio and people couldn't even kiss his feet because they were covered in sores and tumors. Then there was that Pope with the Joust of the Whores, can't remember which one it was. He got together with his family and sort of the cardinals and stuff, and they had a contest to see who could sleep with the most women. And they were like taking roasted chestnuts and tossing them on the floor and having the women grub after them like pigs. He thought it was great fun. What about that one Pope that was like, what, 19 when he was elevated to popedom, and he got his head smashed in with a hammer for sleeping with some dude's wife? What about the Pope that slept with his own sister? Had kids by her too? The Catholic Church certainly inherited all of the holiness of God. Now, if you read the Bible, you'll find there is some overlap there with some of the behavior. You know, it's like, come on. People have to cast aside the illusion that organized religion has some special power that keeps people... That means, yes, you should leave your kid with this weirdo in the robe because God put him there, so he's obviously trustworthy. And in some cases, I hate to say it, this is going to sound bad to some people. In some cases, the religiosity, superstition, and bad choices of the parents are playing a role in this. And it's not just the priests themselves. Because they can't victimize your kid if you're always with your kid by their side. But if you're like, hey, honey, go off to summer camp with these weirdos. They claim that God inspired them so they can do no harm. Go ahead. Yeah, like that's not asking for trouble when you know that there is a problem with priest abuse. There is a problem in the Catholic Church. You're crazy right now if you're leaving your kid alone with a priest. I gotta say that. You're crazy if you're doing that. Unfortunately, a lot of people still do, especially, it's not so much here in the U.S. Here in the U.S., it's gotten exposed more. People talk about it more. What about Italy? What about Latin America and all of these hyper-religious cultures where the priest still is the pillar of the community? You say, oh yeah, the priest touched me the wrong way. What's gonna happen? Is the priest gonna get fired, or are you gonna get fired and cast aside by your entire village? This is a problem in more religions than just Catholicism. When we're talking about the U.S. or, you know, maybe the developed world, Catholicism appears to be the one having this issue. Of course, it is in other religions too. Anytime you get an organized group that takes unto itself that sort of role, you're going to get people who are abusive, either trying to be cured of their proclivities and then they're let down because there is no spiritual force to help them. It's just a bunch of people. It's basically a corporation at this point. Or they're doing it for malicious purposes. That's what I think. And this has been a problem for a long time. Don't think that, oh, well, some people make the excuse, well, it's modern decadence. It's because of the secular evil Satan world that we live in. No, this has been a problem for a long time. Even 20 years ago, here in the U.S. and elsewhere, people were far more religious than they are now. It was still a major problem. It's just that it got hushed up more easily because people were more religious. So yeah, you didn't see the problem as much. Yeah, back in the nifty 50s, if you were abused by the priest, do you think that you came forward to say the priest abused me? No, if you said anything, you probably got smacked across the face by your parents. Well, yeah, then you didn't see these abuse problems. They were happening. You didn't hear about them very much. That's about all. Peace out.
Well, not content with trying to force religion into the European Constitution, now the Catholic Church is interfering in British politics. This week, a cardinal and an archbishop have both threatened to withhold communion from Catholic MPs who don't vote against abortion. Personally, I've always thought it was a shame that the Virgin Mary never had the right to choose, because then we might have been spared 2,000 years of misery and bloodshed. But it wasn't to be, and so for Catholics, abortion has always been a tricky one, especially if you're using a knitting needle in a back alley, which is the Catholic Church's preferred method. Because when it comes to Catholic dogma, human life is only sacred if you obey the rules. Hence, no condoms for Africa. We don't want those people doing anything immoral, so we're going to let them die. This is from an organization supposedly founded on the teachings of Jesus. I'm not sure what teachings exactly. It must be the bit where Jesus talks about living in palaces full of art treasures, protecting pedophiles, and collaborating with the Nazis. I haven't actually managed to find that passage myself, but I'm sure it must be in the Gospels somewhere. And this is why I wasn't too surprised when I first heard that the current Pope is in fact an ex-Nazi. Because to me, the Catholic Church and Nazism go together as naturally as Bibles and lynch mobs. If you think of one, it's difficult not to think of the other. Indeed, I've often thought that it was just bad luck for the Catholic Church that Nazism never became respectable, because they put all their chips on the number of the beast, but it just didn't happen for them. although the Pope, who actually collaborated with Hitler by ignoring the Holocaust, is now being made a saint for his trouble. That's right, Pius XII is being made a saint, which has got to be the cheekiest thing I've heard since Henry Kissinger had the nerve to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not sure why it is that the Catholic Church exudes this aura of not so much evil as, well, actually, yes, evil. I think this whole celibacy thing has a lot to answer for, because there's got to be so much repressed energy there with nowhere to go. I mean, that's bound to cause a few short circuits. I can understand somebody being celibate if that's how they're comfortable, but if you're doing it as a penance, denying your most powerful basic urges because you think that God is going to be pleased with you, well, I think you should see a doctor, because those inner demons that you're struggling with so manfully are really nothing that a $20 whore couldn't put right in a couple of minutes. But of course you couldn't do that, because that would be sinful. Much better to insert your penis into a choir boy and then carry on lecturing dying Africans on sexual abstinence. If any cardinals or bishops are watching this video, let me ask you a question. On a theological level, is it more of a sin for a priest to rape a child while wearing a condom or not wearing one? How much more evil is it to wear the condom? And would it be okay, i.e. would you keep quiet about it, if he went to confession afterwards and truly repented? Until the next time. The Catholic Church has lost so much money on this scandal. They must be down to their last few billion by now. If you were Pope, wouldn't it make sense to try and add up all the sex abuse that's been committed so far, and then add up all the money that's been paid out in compensation, and then you might be able to work out exactly how much the Church is paying for, say, one blowjob, and whether it might be more economical to buy the same product from a professional sex worker. That way you'd be helping to employ somebody in a legitimate occupation, certainly one that's more legitimate than yours is, Your Holiness, Your Eminence, Your Grace. Little word of advice. Clean your own stained glass windows before you start cleaning everybody else's, and then people might take you a little more seriously. Peace.